employed from the Royal Stafford helped form an unwelcoming committee for Mrs. Thatcher as she arrived at the
But the economy did not behave in the way the monetarists predicted. The squeeze on money led to a wave of factory closures, while inflation continued to rise.
Wasn't it? Which factories closed?
A small one, which suffered from lack of investment, among other things.
I've been in insolvency for all my professional life, and I think up until 1980, I used to go in with a great deal of confidence that with new management and perhaps some sort of reorganisation, something could be done. It was very sad to have to go onto the shop floor in the early 80s into a company knowing, in fact, that there wasn't much chance of selling that business, and that, in fact, the business would come to an end.
This is what would normally be a working day. It's the middle of the week, and we're now down in this plant, which produces well over half the cast iron baths of the United Kingdom, on to 1 week on, 1 week off. And that's an immediate and practical effect of the strict monetarism policy that the government is carrying out.
The managing director said, I'm very sorry to tell you, but as from this minute the firm has gone into voluntary liquidation. That was it.
Somebody shouted, will we get any wages? And he said, you'll get nothing.
There now follows a government statement on the current employment figures.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear, oh, dear, oh, dear.
The government seems to have totally lost its way in terms of the interaction of 4 economic indicators on British industry.
Oh, God.
As every member of any firm knows, once with high interest rates as a weapon for controlling money supply, what is the first thing that has to be cut? Investment. Because you still have to pay wages and you still have to pay your current costs.
One day we may be able to afford it. I get the economic policy right.
The government would say, just hang on and stop making such a fuss now.
Yeah, all I can say is that the government isn't standing where I'm bloody well standing.
Even more mystifying was the behaviour of the money supply. Despite the squeeze, it was still growing, something the monetarists thought impossible.
Well, it was all a bit embarrassing, people like me who were at the Bank of England, because we'd been forced, the government had signed up for this path of gently declining monetary aggregates. And instead of the monetary aggregates gently declining, some 5 or 6 months after this new policy was put into operation, they took an enormous jump, and it was very difficult to know why, or to know what ought to be done about it.
By the end of 1980, unemployment had nearly doubled. Manufacturing output had fallen by 1/6. Britain was declining faster than even in the darkest days of the 1930s. Despite this, the politicians were convinced they were right. The laws of their science told them so.
Let me just have a word about monetarism and monetary control first. I mean, you all know full well that if you produce too much of something, its value will fall. That's elementary. It isn't a newfangled theory. It is as essential as the law of gravity, and you can't avoid it.
People used to say, you're destroying my job, and I was absolutely secure in my conscience that their negotiators and their employers were destroying their jobs by not following rational expectations and seeing that if they didn't accommodate unit labor costs by a combination of pay increases allowed and rising productivity to what would keep their prices internationally competitive, jobs would go. So there was I, absolutely clear in my conscience, and there were they convinced.
most expensive ever.
The strike lasted almost a year. Thatcher used every means at her disposal to destroy the union. Eventually, the miners were defeated.
For a closer look at what President Hugo Chávez's victory actually means for Venezuelans and why there is such a massive popular support for the president, we have the following report. Running water, electricity, and a real home. Having spent most of her life in Venezuela's slums, these are luxuries that Ana Silva could only dream of before.
When I got this apartment, I just couldn't believe it. I thought my eyes were deceiving me. I'm thankful to this government for helping people like me.
She was able to move her family into this home thanks to a housing program established under President Hugo Chávez. It's one of the many projects that has earned him tremendous popular support among the poor.
Pa'lante, comandante, pa'lante con fervor, que tu pueblo te bendice, pa'lante luchador, pa'lante viviremos, pa'lante venceremos, quiero patria, voy contigo, comandante del amor, pa'lante, comandante, pa'lante con fervor, que tu pueblo te bendice, pa'lante luchador, pa'lante viviremos, pa'lante venceremos, comandante, padre amigo, Hugo Chávez vencedor.